So I was discussing with you the Torah's description of those creatures which are kosher, susceptible to be eaten, and those which are not. And the Torah lists, part of the problem is that the Jewish people were away from the land of Israel for a long period of time. And therefore, to a certain extent, we were unfamiliar with what animal the Torah is describing. I think a prime example is that the Torah says the shofan and the arnevet. So the translation over all of the generations was that it's two kinds of rabbits. That a shafan is also what in the Western world we knew as a rabbit. But I think it's been pretty conclusively demonstrated here now that the shafan is not a rabbit. The arnevet is a rabbit, or that family of rabbits, of hares. But that the shafan is an animal here that's called a hyrax. And it it's native to Eretz Yisrael and to the Middle East, and it's more related to rats and moles than it is to rabbits, and that it is carnivorous. It eats meat, living creatures, and the rabbit does not. The rabbit is a vegetarian. So that's an example of the fact that somehow the tradition was not clear. And it's hard to reestablish traditions when it's had a very long break in time and when the language was not the language. And so Jews did not speak in terms in France and Germany and Eastern Europe about shvanim or about an arnevet, so it became a name, but the actuality wasn't there. In any event, I discussed with you yesterday also about fish, that snapir v'kaskesses, and then there were fish that were discovered that lost the kaskeset when they were taken out of the water. So was that considered to be sufficient that you could still eat it? And I pointed out to you that most of the tuna fish that we eat today comes from a species of tuna which is called the skipjack. And when you take the skipjack, in the ocean the skipjack has scales. But when you take it out, the scales fall off. So that when they're loaded on the boat to be taken to be processed, they don't appear to have scales. So that was a shaila and halacha. And Feinstein had a tshuva on it, others have tshuvas on it. But it's well accepted today that that's a kosher fish and that the tuna fish is eaten in abundance. Now, the Torah also describes her as birds. And there we are really at a loss, because we really don't know what those Hebrew names of birds are. So, for instance, Nesher we know is an eagle. But there are other birds there that are mentioned that the Meforshim have all different names for them, depending upon what part of the world they were in, because birds are native to certain places. If you go to Africa, the birds there are different than the birds that live in America, and they are different than the birds that live here in Eretz Yisrael. So it became a question of identifying the bird. And the Torah doesn't give us simonim. It doesn't say, as it does by the animals, that it has mafreses parsa, malagera. So those you have exact description of what is required. It has to be able to regurgitate the food. It has to be split hooves. So if it's missing either both of those qualities, then it cannot be eaten. So that became rather simple. But and by fish also it said snapir v'kaskeses. So that also became identifiable. So that we know, for instance, that porpoises and other sea creatures are not kosher because of the fact that they don't have snapir v'kaskeses. They're mammals mainly in the sea, and they don't have any of the required simonim that would render them kosher. But by birds, the Torah did not mention what the criteria is. It did not say what it is. And because of that, therefore, it is always since the Jewish people have been all over the world, and all over the world you get different birds. So therefore, the question regarding this has always been appeared in the rabbinic response of the time. What is it? Maybe a prime example in our time would be the turkey, the American turkey, which is not indigenous to Europe, nor is it indigenous to the Middle East. No one ever saw a turkey here. And in the 17th century, when Europeans came to the American continent, so they discovered the American turkey. And they shipped it back to Europe, where it started to grow. So then the shaila arose, is the turkey a kosher bird? Can it be eaten? There naturally, when the question arises, there naturally are different opinions. One opinion is that we only eat birds that we have a masorah, that somehow we have a tradition that it's a kosher bird. So that would be like poultry. We would know chickens, ducks. That's mentioned already. Pigeons, doves that were used for korbanot. So we have traditions about these types of birds that could be eaten. But here is a bird that has no tradition. It didn't exist. It existed in different continents, but it didn't exist in the Eurasian continent. So therefore there were those poskim that said that it could not be eaten. However, there were those who said that a turkey is really a big chicken, and that it's a member of the poultry family, and just like all of the other members of the poultry family, geese and ducks, chickens, are kosher birds. So this bird resembles them. It's the same type of bird, except it's bigger. Yeah, but otherwise it has all the same characteristics. It's hatched from eggs. Everything matches. And therefore they said that the bird is kosher. And it should be eaten, can be eaten. And this disagreement raged for about a century. Because halacha is not decided in 1 minute. It takes time. And to a certain extent, it takes public opinion. The Gemara says many times, Rei Amod Dabar. See what the people are doing. Meaning that there's an instinct within the Jewish people to do the right thing. This has nothing to do with elections. It has to do with other turkeys. The Amshinover has a tshuva on it. The Amshinover is the 19th century already, when the turkey meat was common in Europe, because they brought the animals from the United States, and then they had breeding farms, etc. And therefore he discusses it, and he says that they ate it. And therefore, over time, it became accepted. Here in Eretz Yisrael, in the beginning of the 20th century, when Jews first came back here, so there were no turkeys in the country, because they're not indigenous to this type of climate, and they have to be farmed, they have to be raised, they don't grow wild at all. So because of that, the question arose here, but the question really didn't arise until much later, when farmers, kibbutzim, etc., started to raise turkeys. And turkey meat became a staple, so to speak, or they wanted it to become a staple. And then we had tshuvas. Rav Herzog wrote tshuvas, and the Rabbanut wrote, there's a tshuva of Tzvi Pesach Frag. They all were matir to turkey. They all said that turkeys are big chickens. And that's pretty much the way it exists today throughout the Jewish world. That we accept that the turkey is a kosher bird, and that its meat can be eaten, and that it's shechted the same way that chickens and ducks and geese are shechted in order to be eaten. What about other more exotic creatures? So in the Middle Ages, pheasants were a luxury item. Kings, royalty, they ate pheasants. So there's Shaila arose, are pheasants a kosher bird? And again, there's no clarity on that, but I don't think it's a popular bird today. I mean, I don't see it sold in the markets, though there are people who every year have a banquet of exotic creatures that they claim to be kosher. So, for instance, you have the shaila about the giraffe. So the giraffe chews its cud, and it has split hooves. So it should be a kosher animal. But the shaila arose, where is the mokam hashchita?
It's too long.
Where do you shecht it? And because of the fact that on that point there was no unanimity of opinion, and because giraffes are not really on the menu, for Friday night, so it remained just almost a theoretical thing. But I saw that there are people that have this exotic banquet once a year here in Yerushalayim, where they have every sort of creature imaginable. So they say that they know the mokam hashchita of giraffes, and they have giraffe meat. Now, I don't know if giraffe meat tastes good or it doesn't taste good, but if you're into exotic things, it has very little to do with taste. It has to do with how exotic it is. And so the list that exists in the Torah is subject to discoveries of new creatures. And therefore, by birds which have no simonim of kashrus that the Torah gives us, so therefore we are very careful not to experiment with birds, because we do not have a tradition. We don't have a Masorah that is kosher. We'll see that regarding insects also. We don't, to most of us, eating insects would be repugnant, or grasshoppers. But there are places in the world, and Jewish places in the world, that ate grasshoppers. I think the Ammonites was part of it, and other places. And they say that the meat tastes like chicken meat. So if you close your eyes, I imagine it's all right. But they say they had simonim. They had a tradition. So if you have a tradition, so then that's what the bird is. But in the absence of a tradition, we usually do not experiment with these things. And therefore we eat only what the staple foods are, those that are known to us for generations, that have been regarded as being kosher. Rabbi Chananya ben Akash Omer Ratzah Kodesh Baruch Hu L'Tzakos Es Yisrael V'fichach Hirba Lahem Torah Mitzvah Shenemar Ashlecha Teis Matzit Kol Yafiu Torah Yafiu